Okay, so welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Tiff4Tat. I am Tiff,
And I'm Tat.
and we are here to nerd out about CPQ. So we have another guest with us today. His name is Aaron. He's from CDS Visual. Aaron, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what CDS is.
Thank you, Tiff and Tat. My name is Aaron Smith. I am the VP of Solution Engineering here at CDS Visual. CDS Visual is a 18-year-old CAD-based visualization provider. We got our start many years ago helping industrial suppliers, primarily manufacturers and distributors, put 3D CAD models of purchased components online. Over the years, that kind of transitioned kind of up the food chain. So we went from ball bearings and fasteners to motors and gear motors, all the way up to massive machines now. And within our solution, we kind of take care of the CPQ side. So we talk about visualization for CPQ and visual configuration, which we'll probably go into some detail in today's call, to aftermarket parts, to digital work instructions. And yeah, a little bit about CDS. We were acquired by Dover Corporation about 3 years ago. And since then, we've been providing a variety of new solutions to the marketplace. I'd say primarily our target customers are distributors, industrial distributors like a Grainger type company, and then a original equipment manufacturer, an OEM, that makes some type of large industrial machinery or mobile equipment, such as a tractor or a garbage truck.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to have you on the show. How did you get to CDS Visual? How long have you been there?
Oh gosh. So I was employee number 3 back in the day, which was 18 years ago. So I'm 25 now, so you can do the math. My background's in mechanical engineering, and I spent a few years as a mechanical engineer in the semiconductor space, and then went to work for a company called InPart, which was a startup kind of mid 90s, which basically was one of the first companies to put CAD models on this thing called the internet. And that company was purchased by a software company called PTC out of Boston. Worked for PTC for a few years, doing PDM and PLM in the CAD space. And from there, the original CDS InPart team basically got the band back together, as you say, and we started CDS Visual back 18 years ago, and that's kind of how I ended up here. So it's been a good ride. Always kind of serving industrial companies. That's kind of been my personal niche, whether it's being a mechanical engineer using CAD, to helping engineers download CAD models, to providing various types of visualization for configurators, to aftermarket parts, to digital work instructions. Always that 3D piece has always been a big part of what I've been doing for the last 8 years, more than that.
Yeah, that's great.
So, Aaron, I got a question for you. In the last, few years, what is the biggest changes that you have seen, in this visualization space? Do you, do you see the application of, of visualization, the higher demand for it, or, what, area do you see, the application is more, more common, these days?
It's a great question. So I think when people think about visualization, the core thing is that it runs in a web browser. And I've been doing this long enough for where at one point there was no web browser. Now there's web browsers. And to get visualization within a web browser, you used to have to add in some type of executable application often. And so the kind of growth of the support for JavaScript within browsers has really, in the last probably 7-8 years, really enabled seamless visualization. You can imagine being in a CPQ platform, getting to the point where you configure the product, and then having to download a third-party executable to see it. That wouldn't work.
Right. Yeah.
So in this day and age, it's kind of this seamless integration. So the devices have caught up to the technology. The 3D visualization has been around on CAD desktops for like 20 years. It's not new. 3D CAD design has been around since like the late 80s, early 90s, let's see, with PTC and SolidWorks. And it works great on a desktop back in the day when you had a NVIDIA graphics card, let's say, and You'd use those gaming cards in your CAD software. You could build an entire machine in 3D. The transition to putting that onto the web and mobile devices, that's kind of I'd say the large recent development. I think where it's going is just kind of continued support for different types of devices. I mean, Zuckerberg came out last week and showed some of the new Meta augmented reality goggles, which I think are picking up where maybe HoloLens left off, like a very lightweight device that can project that digital twin out in front of you. So what I see is CPQ supporting browser-based visualization, but kind of where it's going, I think, is probably extended support for mobile devices as the devices improve and as the adoption of those devices increases out in the marketplace.
In the old days, when I was an engineer, the application that I use, we use, I think it uses like OpenGL or one of those things. Nowadays, I think on the web browser, like a WebGL is available. Does your software use something like those, or under the hood, what does it use?
Yeah, it uses the native rendering engines within Chrome and
Chrome, okay.
Safari and Firefox. It is basically all JavaScript based at the end of the day. There's open libraries such as very popular one's called 3.js. And it is a really important thing to look at, when people are shopping for visualization providers, is are you going into a proprietary tech stack or is it more open source? We've tended to always gone on the open source side of that. What is fascinating is when we look at the CAD companies, for many good reasons under PLM, they'll actually kind of gate the visualization within a web browser because it's all under version and access control within the overarching umbrella of PLM within the firewall. I think where we all play is kind of more dealer, distributor, customer facing, where you're outside of the PLM, where you need I'll say, ungated, unrestricted ability to provide various types of visualization within the context of CPQ. I often talk about CPQ and e-commerce kind of interchangeably, but within those two contexts. So we here at CDS tend to be more on the open source side because ultimately the end consumer of our visualization is often outside of the firewall. It's a customer, it's a dealer, and they need free access to view those assets. I will say that many times we're dealing with two types of levels of detail. So for example, an engineering CAD model or a manufacturing CAD model that we might reuse, that's going to have intellectual property in it. So we go through kind of great pains to make sure that the visualization from engineering doesn't get mistakenly used in visualization for CPQ because it's a bit of like apples and oranges. Oftentimes you want to let customers see what it is they're going to buy visually before they buy it, before they quote it. But oftentimes you want to use a simplified model. So there's a lot of thought that goes into the actual detail of the CAD asset and then how you flow that downstream to other consumers. Now, there are internal consumers. We do quite a bit of, I'll call it CAD automation or engineering automation within the context of CPQ, where based on the CPQ parameters, we're going to make a engineering level detailed CAD model or CAD model assembly, and then often a multiple page dimension drawing for engineering and manufacturing. With those same assets, we can actually make non-IP versions for end user consumption, as well as what I usually call like a sales drawing, where it's a limited view of on a PDF drawing with basic dimensions that you'd often have in the say the appendix of a proposal document.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. I have a question.
Yeah.
What is your favorite visualization project that you've done? Like, what's the most unique use case that you've solved?
Gosh, I could talk for a while on that one. So one of my favorites, and like I was saying, there's kind of this spectrum of visualization problems. So I'll probably give you three answers because I just like picking your favorite kid, right? You can't just do that.
I was just about to say that.
So on the non-configured products, I think one of my favorite projects has been Grainger, the work we've done with Grainger. So if you wanted a Grainger's website today, There's, I think, over 200,000 part numbers. It has a little cat icon. When you click it, you get a very nice 3D model of the product you're looking at. You can download a CAD model, a variety of native and neutral formats. You can also download a sales level detailed drawing of that product. And Grainger's been a great client of CDS for, gosh, probably 7-8 years now. And kind of in a staged rollout, we've, started with, 10,000 parts, then 100,000 parts and 200,000 parts. And really the problem that we're solving there is Grainger's customers need to see what it is they're going to buy before they buy it often. And when you have an engineering customer, either in a new product introduction or in MRO, maintenance, repair, and operation use case, they often need to be able to view the dimensions of that particular ball bearing, fastener, gear, motor, whatever it is. In new product introduction, you often want to download the CAD model as a mechanical engineer, put it into your design to make sure it fits. So Grainger has really been a leader in the industrial distributor space by investing in very complete coverage of their CAD assets throughout the applicable product category. So you're not gonna find CAD models under cleaning supplies on Grainger's website, but you're gonna find very good coverage of CAD models on bearings and fasteners and products like that. So that's one of my favorite projects, I'd say, for kind of non-configured products. Gosh, for configured products, we did some work with a company that makes tunnel car washes named Bellinger.
Oh.
And this one's fun because you can actually drive through one of these at the end of the day. So imagine you're in the CPQ platform on the kind of, it's almost like a two-thirds, one-third type user experience where a good 2/3 of the screen is a visualization window. And on the right side is kind of your pick list window. And I'd say with visual configurators, usually it's either the picks are on the left or the picks are on the right, and 2/3 of the screen is the visual asset. So you're in this car wash configurator. It's a tunnel car wash. You're kind of starting your configuration journey. And then as you're making your selections, the car wash starts to build up in 3D on the main 2/3 of the browser window. And you're going to start with the size of the building, because that obviously dictates a lot. You're going to start with maybe the brushes, the sprayers. And so every click you make in CPQ is popping up different items on the 3D model, which you can rotate. It's basically on a platform. And then there's a bit of visual configuration, what I call visual configuration. That's where you can move the items, you can space the items apart. And I'd say, why does that matter? And the reason it matters is it drives the bill of materials. So if I move the brush 5 feet this way and the dryer this way, it's going to add to the tubing and electrical harnesses that need to fall into the bill of materials to generate the quote. And so at the end of it, you basically have this interactive 3D model. You have your pricing in CPQ. It's all completely seamless via APIs. And then you can do kind of what we call a fly through. So you can actually click a button and it's almost like you're the car going through the car wash. And we've also gone so far as to do, because this is really, I think, at the end of the day, a sales tool for the car wash company. You can do an augmented reality model via an iPhone app, which means you can basically scan a QR code within CPQ, put down maybe like a 1/10 scale of the car wash on the table in front of you. We've had customers do this in a sales engagement where they basically put it on the table, hand the iPad to their customer who's going to purchase the car wash, and they can really see how it's going to work and make changes in real time. Or you can go outside to the parking lot and view it in one-to-one time and kind of hold your iPad or iPhone up and actually walk through it. So you're kind of, sales-wise, that's an amazing sales tool. And we see companies that invest in CPQ, oftentimes they'll do it for efficiencies, like, that we need to make the order entry process more efficient. We need to close more deals. But when you put it in the hands of a salesperson in the field, it just becomes this amazing selling tool, because you can, like I said, you can see what it is you're going to get before you buy. And you start to build that kind of emotional connection with your end customer. It's going to spend a few $100,000 on this car wash per se, where it's like, and then I think the iterations become a critical piece too, which is another key piece of any CPQ is, I don't want the brushes there, I want it over here. So you just move it. Everything updates. And there is a bit of, I say there's bidirectionality. because the rules effectively are always mastered in CPQ, and we can pull the rules out as needed to represent the visualization. But sometimes you'll make a change. You might relocate some of the positions of the car wash elements. That might push logic back to CPQ to change the available selections over here. So it's that bidirectionality is really critical. Third example is a newer product for CDS, which is called Partable, and that's an aftermarket parts search. So when I think of CPQ and e-commerce as kind of the life cycle of a product, CPQ is up front. I have an industrial machine, it needs to be configured, and then it's sold. The bill of materials goes into ERP, it goes into PLM, goes to MRP. It ships, it's installed. Now we're talking about how we manage the life cycle of that product. And that's where the e-commerce is coming into place with some type of aftermarket part search. Because usually with CPQ, there's a serial number attached to it because it's configured. The bill of materials is basically configured to that serial number, so that's what I like to say. So my third favorite product is basically Partable, both using 2D and 3D to enable the aftermarket part search for those parts that were configured upstream in CPQ. We see a lot of interest in the marketplace to make their aftermarket parts business more efficient. Companies often get much higher margins on their aftermarket parts than they do on the original equipment for a variety of reasons. And and we see this actually every day when talking to customers, I think 10 out of 10 times you start with CPQ, and then you get it running, you stand up your e-commerce solution. And e-commerce solutions work great as long as you know the part number of the bearing that broke in your car wash. When you don't know the bearing part number, you can't type it into e-commerce. Your e-commerce doesn't do anything for you. So what happens? The tech support person, the customer in the field picks up the phone. They call the manufacturer. I have this broken bearing in my hand. What's the part number? And so we get into this very interesting loop. I'll call it loop of inefficiency, where all of these resources at the dealer and the manufacturer are trying to figure out what the part number is for that particular serial number, which, by the way, was configured maybe a year ago in CPQ. Yeah. So Partable does a really good job, I think, of helping customers with regard to self-service to find that part number. And it does it in 3 different ways. Usually you'll start with so you imagine you log into a portal. I bought one of these fancy car washes. I log into a portal. I see my order in the portal. I go in there. Maybe I bought 10 car washes. So I picked the one for San Jose, California that I own. I go in there and I know that knows the serial number, which means my search is at this point contextual to the bill of materials for that serial number. And then we provide 3 different types of searches within that serial number. Typically, there's a 2D exploded view. This is often in many of the parts manuals. So an exploded view of the car wash, the sub-assemblies. I click on the call out number, and that's the part. Add it to my cart. That works great. Second type of search is where we're actually using CAD models. So imagine the 3D CAD model that we used on the front end for CPQ visualization is now being reused for aftermarket part search, where the user can navigate through, it's called the model tree in CAD, from the top level assembly to a low level assembly, explode parts, spin them around. I got the broken bearing in my hand, look at my screen, it's that part right there. I click it, add that to my cart. The third type of search, which we have for Partable, is an artificial intelligence powered image search, which everyone's pretty common these days. You open up your Amazon app, you click the camera icon in the search bar, you take a picture of whatever, and Amazon brings back the results. Our search is very similar to that, where you take a picture of, say, the broken ball bearing, and we bring you back the results. What's different than, say, an Amazon search is we're searching for that ball bearing within the context of your BOM and serial number. Further, there's often lots of bearings on these machines, and bearings all look the same. Yeah. So bringing back 50 results isn't going to be very helpful, but we understand visually via AI which subassembly you're looking at, and then can identify the bearings within that subassembly, thus bringing back a much smaller search result set, which you can then add to your shopping cart.
That's interesting. You mentioned AI a few times. That kind of lead to my next question. So I heard that you mentioned that in your part search, you have some use of AI, in the besides that, that use case scenario, are other places that you leverage AI in your solution?
Oh, that's a good question. So as a company, we leverage it in several different areas. And we have our own kind of homegrown in-house AI platform called mechanics.ai. And then we use that both for our products as well as for custom projects. One thing that makes our AI different than, say, ChatGPT or Llama or Gemini is we're really good at extracting data from engineering CAD models and drawings. So we've kind of tuned our AI to be very engineering centric. We'll often use that to populate our solutions. So an example is I have a large industrial machine. I've got 10,000 serial numbers, each with PDF exploded view images going back 20 years. And I want to digitize all that and attach it to either my CPQ platform or my e-commerce platform. And kind of the expectation level is you can mouse over a call out, and you'll get a little hotspot. That's kind of the user experience expectation. Well, to manually draw those little XY coordinates could take a really long time. So one use of AI that we have is we ingest the images. We use AI, which is basically OCR with our AI, to recognize the call out number, how it matches to the bill of materials. So you have the call out number is maybe 1 in the balloon. The table in the PDF file, the source document, says item 1 and then the part number and the description. We're able to extract all of that and basically connect and link the hotspots to the data. So you can basically get this great user experience with hotspots without having to actually manually put the hotspots on. That's one use case. Another use case is we have a tool called Mentor, which is a digital work instruction platform. Didn't talk about that before too much, but that allows you to basically take traditional work instructions or standard operating procedures, which are primarily in Word, Excel, PowerPoint. It's tucked away in a SharePoint drive somewhere, which end up either on the factory floor or in the field service PDF guide, let's say. And we've made that with Mentor into a multimedia-rich, interactive digital work instruction platform. So you're basically on a mobile device or a desktop device being given step-by-step work instructions. I like to jokingly say it's a better mousetrap for a very old problem around capturing tribal knowledge and communicating tribal knowledge. We use AI to populate that solution. So for example, if you have thousands of PDF files, each with 50 pages each, which are your traditional work instructions, step 1, step 2, step 3, we can extract all of that using AI and populate it into Mentor, thus being able to give our customers the ability to readily migrate their legacy content into a digital multimedia-rich work instruction platform. And then the third thing we're doing, which I think has a lot of applicability for CPQ, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but sometimes people will use CPQ to create a quote, not necessarily configure some type of industrial machinery. So for example, I'm a distributor of I'm an industrial distributor, and my customer sends me a package of PDF files. And in those PDF files are all of these manufacturer parts and part numbers. And so I have to have an inside salesperson kind of manually type from this package of PDF files from the customer into the CPQ system, each item number, quantity, and description. And so you're kind of manually data entering from the customer source data into, say, CPQ. That creates your proposal that can go through the pricing and quoting workflow. And what we've heard is that's not good because you've kind of created a very manual operation, which is necessary. So we're using Mechanics AI in that use case to look at technical specifications, engineering drawings. We're extracting the part numbers and manufacturers, and then presenting it to, in some cases, CPQ, in some cases, e-commerce, into a structured format so they can readily ingest it. And it's kind of fascinating because without AI, optical character recognition like 4 or 5 years ago couldn't do this. Or I could say it would do it very poorly.
Yeah. With OCI, I mean like I remember like in the old days, I just don't trust them because a lot of times you don't get the part number right because like the zero
That's
and the eight, sometimes they screwed it up, so
You're spot on. Spot on. So those are some examples of how we're using AI today.
Yeah, that's great. So going back to Partable, first of all, Partable is a CDS product. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, great. And then what do you think is the hardest part, for lack of a better word? What is the hardest part of aftermarket parts now versus using Partable? Like what's the most painful problem that Partable solves?
I think it's first around adoption. So we've had many customers that launch their e-commerce platform and no one uses it. So you go through a year of implementing it, or you work with a great system integrator like Pierce Washington, everything works great, and you roll it out and no one uses it. And you're like, why isn't anyone using it? And so you start doing voice of the customer. It turns out that the aftermarket search is a critical impediment if it's not there to adopting e-commerce. Your dealers, your customers, your distributors, they're smart. They're always going to want what I call the path of least resistance. And honestly, picking up the phone and calling my favorite inside salesperson is an easier way to place an order, then I'm going to do that. Now, what happens is that's not a good way to adopt e-commerce because there's no e-commerce adoption in that scenario. So what we look at is when you roll out e-commerce as an industrial distributor or OEM, you might experience poor adoption. You peel the onion back. Why is that? Well, you need to give the end users a really good, powerful tool to, as you were asking, Tiffany, what is the part number? That's what we're trying to answer here. If you knew the part number, you just type it in, but 90+% of the time you don't know the part number. It's not, the bearing that's in the machine won't have the part number on it, or maybe it got rubbed off.
yeah.
And further, this gets into another interesting piece, which is this term of an OEM product versus a third-party product. So the example I like to give is if any of us went to AutoZone right now, all of the air filters in AutoZone are third-party. You're not going to find a Ford air filter, a Toyota air filter in there at all. The dealer sells the Toyota air filter and the Ford dealer sells the Ford air filter, and they get really good margins on those parts. So with aftermarket parts, companies are also very concerned about protecting their margins and not making it, making it easy for the customers to do business with them and order the aftermarket part for them. Do our customers manufacture every ball bearing and fastener that goes into their machines? Absolutely not. But they want to tell you their part number versus you going on Grainger's website and buying the part from there. So it's kind of like, to your question, Tiffany, it's kind of like ease of transaction adoption. And we've had some customers that have shared some interesting stories with regard to e-commerce adoption. Is sometimes you have to incentivize your users to use e-commerce. And I was like, well, what does that mean exactly? And oftentimes what we see is companies, I'll say, offering an incentive for their channels, their customers to use e-commerce. Maybe they get a 5% discount. But if they make a phone call or send an email, they don't get that discount. So you have to put the tools out there first and also kind of work with how you're going to incentivize people to use those tools once they're out there.
Yeah, I mean just from my personal experience, when I wanted to buy a part for my car, sometimes it takes, even though I know like maybe 80-90% sure that this is the right part, but I always feel reluctant to buy it because hey, what happens if it's through a website, then I say, is this really the right part, right? Because sending it back is very is uncomfortable, is difficult. But if you have a exploded view of the unit I'm looking at, and then the part actually is there, and it tells me this is the right part, it gives me like, even though I have 80-90% just having that picture, it will give me like a, a 99% sure, I'll actually place the order faster. And then that's the, definitely, will be adoption wise, from, just from a general public. I think it's probably, definitely, at least for me, I feel more comfortable placing the order, that
Yeah.
definitely has a benefit.
Yeah, it's the confidence, and I'll answer your question another way, Tiffany. Downtime's critical for these industrial machines, or reducing downtime is critical for
Yeah.
these industrial machines. You or I can pick up the phone if our car is not working. Like if my air filter is down, I don't want to drive my car. I can pick up my phone and use an Uber. There's alternatives.
Yeah.
If I make a machine that maybe say makes soda cans, that machine can't be down because every minute that machine's down is costing that company money. And so these aftermarket parts become critical path to ensuring that you hit the uptime targets for that industrial machinery. And to your point, Tat, the confidence becomes critical. I'm starting with my, if it's car, it's a VIN number. If it's an industrial machine, it's a serial number. But getting down to that right part and then quickly ordering it, and then obviously the OEM that's selling it can charge a premium because they're gonna, ship it same day, ship it next day. It almost doesn't matter what that ball bearing costs because if my production facility's down, I need it fixed.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned that you have a lot of application for CPQ or commerce projects. I also see there's the same thing. A lot of of my CQ projects. There's always like now people they say, oh, I want it to be a little bit jazz up. You make it a little bit more user friendly so that they want a graphical interface for selecting the options. So from that perspective, like from a partner's perspective, right? What is the your typical implementation like when you have like a CPQ project, like how do partners like us participate in a project where where the customer wants to leverage CDS in the solution?
That's a great question. When I look at a visualization project for CPQ, I tend to want to very quickly identify the type of visualization problem that we're solving. And I'll simplify it into like two use cases. One use case is where you're making your selections in CPQ and some type of 3D part is updating on the middle of the screen. You're not interacting with the 3D, you're making clicks in CPQ and that 3D object is updated. And then you might want to download a CAD model or CAD drawing based on those selections. That's kind of use case number one. And that applies to, from consumer products to industrial products. That's almost to some degree kind of the expected baseline functionality these days, where people want to see what it is they're buying. Usually it starts with internal users wanting to see it, and then it goes to dealers and distributors, and then eventually they'll release it within the context of a controlled portal to the end customers. The second type is what I'll call more of a visual configurator, where either in 2D or 3D, you're working with the CPQs, but you might be, and a good example is like a kitchen design tool where I'm laying out my cabinets in 2D or 3D. So you're kind of grabbing items from a menu, you're laying them out in 3D, you're moving things around. There's visual constraint rules. So if I try to put two cabinets on top of one another, it won't let you do that. If you try to put an upper cabinet for a base cabinet, it doesn't let you do that. You can't put a cabinet on top of a sink. All these kind of visual rules. And that, in terms of visual configuration, can apply to many different industries, from consumer to industrial. We have a customer that makes walk-in refrigeration systems. So if you went to a Costco or a 7-Eleven, the refrigerated rooms you'll see there with the doors, we built an entire visual configurator solution using a 2D top view layout where you're basically drawing the building. It's a panelized system. It does all these very complicated calculations to figure out the optimal width of each panel for manufacturing purposes. Lets you add chamfers, lets you add nooks, lets you put multiple boxes together, doors, windows, very complicated configuration, at the end of which you get a 3D model, even though you did the visual configuration in 2D, as well as both sales level drawings as well as engineering level drawings. So to kind of summarize, you have kind of your basic visualization for CPQ, where your clicks are in CPQ and the object is updating, versus kind of a visual configurator where it could be a space planning or a machine design or something along those types of contexts. So how we work with companies is oftentimes we'll kind of, usually it's a CPQ partner or system integrator will say, I have a customer that has this use case. And we'll just start to peel the onion back on that one. Like, hey, what is it looking to do? Where are the assets mastered today? How can we reuse those assets? What's the problem we're going to, just kind of your typical discovery type questions, and then figure out what the best solution for them is going to be within the context of their CPQ. We like to think we kind of bring a best of breed solution to the table. So regardless of the CPQ software, we have APIs and web services where you can very easily integrate CDS visualization into it. And then I think the other nice part is once you do that for visualization, our Partible product downstream can reuse those assets for the aftermarket part search, where we do have many customers that use that within the context of e-commerce, but we actually have a few customers that use it within the context of CPQ. So you're selecting items from Partible, adding them to a CPQ quote, and then that goes through the quoting process there.
So let's say, to create the Partible, do you call it a model, or, what do you call that? And what kind of effort, or what kind of, activity, does it involve to get to the point that, okay, the 3D model is available, to be presented in screen, what's that process look like?
Good question. So Partible is not a repository. It's basically a search engine. So we're not duplicating data from the single source of the truth. The single source of the truth, say for BOM and your sales BOM, is usually the company's ERP system. The source of the exploded view images and the 3D models is usually a PLM system. What Partible does, which is unique, is allows the user to combine those two assets, which are very disjointed, and put them into the context of CPQ or e-commerce. So what we consume, or what's published to Partible, is the BOM data, the 2D data, the 3D data. And then we layer that into either CPQ or e-commerce. The key things there being the serial numbers and the part numbers, because the part numbers have to exist on our side as well as exist on the e-commerce or CPQ side, because that's the only way you can add the item to, say, the appropriate shopping cart.
We're getting close to time now. Aaron, do you have any question for Tiffany or me?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys kind of see in the marketplace. So we've talked a lot about visualization for CPQ, and with your industrial customers, how does the aftermarket part piece come up? Is it something to look at as a phase two? Just love to see what kind of you guys hear in the marketplace.
I'll let Tat take that one. Go ahead.
Okay. From the CPQ side, we don't see the aftermarket too much, but for like e-commerce, we do see quite a bit of those, because usually when a customer purchase the product, and then if there's any replacement part they potentially could purchase, we usually see that in e-commerce. So that's where where it's that people can directly go in and order without contacting the company. And if there's a problem, or if they want to add an accessory, they could go to e-commerce site. So that's that's the part that I see more when it comes to aftermarket. But the CPQ, we rarely have people go in, because when a part is not working, they need it right now. So they don't want to get a quote for the part, and they just want it. I want it maybe next hour, next day. Not so there's no time to go through a quoting process. That's what I see. At least from CPQ, we don't see too much of that.
When you work with your customers, maybe on the initial discovery for CPQ, does the e-commerce piece of that conversation usually come up in the overall planning? Do you think about, we're going to configure it over here, and then we're going to have e-commerce down here in a later phase?
Yeah, in the like, I would say, like, let's say 3 or 5 years ago, we don't, usually a CPQ is CPQ,
Yeah.
But nowadays is they all want the total commerce solution, we call it. They when even like when they're in the process of doing implement CPQ, we always hear people say, oh, we want our objective is the self-service, so that to get upon that, okay, we want to integrate our e-commerce solution with with CPQ, and then so that the experience will be we call it total commerce. Is you from quote to supporting the customer, and that's exactly like my current project right now. That's that's what they want to do. They want to say CPQ first, and then commerce is going to follow pretty much immediately after. So or like the one that I'm on now is we kind of want to launch it pretty much around the same time. So that's a very very common these days, I think.
Do you see the same, Tiffany?
Yeah, so I do. I think it really depends on where the company is at in their digital transformation. So a lot of these old manufacturing companies, they're using Rolodexes as their CRM, or it depends on what the company is, right? Some of them are a lot more along the line than that. So if you have a manufacturer who's using Rolodexes, and this is literally a customer I talked to 8 weeks ago, who they're using Rolodexes at salespeople's desks. So if you're starting with someone like that, of course it comes up during the full sales process. Like, hey, how far into the future can we get you to visualize and look at? And yes, that end goal is always the total commerce solution, which involves the self-service portal and where Partable would come in and all that. But for folks like that, you got to start at, okay, let's get your Rolodex into the computer system first and get the users used to going to the computer and cloud-based systems to work their accounts and work their sales and all that. And then from there, you get into opportunity forecasting and all that. And then once you have those basics, then you can start putting on top of that CPQ, and then on top of that e-commerce. So it really depends on where the company is at in their journey. For companies that have been using CPQ for a long time, certainly they want to transform what they've built, those building blocks, into a full self-service portal. And yeah, it just depends on where they're at.
Excellent. I was gonna do a plug. So if we have a description under the podcast, we have a link of a video that we put together with John Lerkind, who runs your Salesforce practice, on the Pierce Washington total commerce kind of vision. So it's basically CPQ with visualization up front, and then it's basically Partable with e-commerce on the other end, all kind of seamless throughout the life cycle. So if we can, we can put it down below for people to see what it is we're talking about.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Nice.
Yeah. Good. So bonus question for my 6-year-old who is currently obsessed with tongue twisters. Can you say visualization 3 times fast?
I don't know. I could try. Visualization, visualization, visualization.
Hey, there you go. Love it. Well, Aaron, it was great to have you on the show. If people want to contact you after the show, how can they contact you?
Yeah, our website's CDS, like Charlie David Samuel, cdsvisual.com, and lots of great resources on there to get a hold of us.
Okay, perfect. And then we'll put that website and any personal contact information where they can contact you directly in the show notes, along with if anybody wants to contact Pierce Washington, me, or Tat, we'll put all of our contact information in the show notes as well.
Fantastic. Been fun. Thank you, Tat. Thank you, Tiff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining, Aaron.